is really closely tied to strategy two, which is focused on getting leaders to work together across sectors to solve problems. This strategy is based on the fact that challenges facing these cities are often too great for city governments to tackle alone, especially in this era of limited resources, which I bet a lot of you can relate to. Leaders beyond government need to feel a sense of ownership over making the city a better place, and must work with the elected and appointed leaders to set a plan in motion for revitalizing the city. So it's important that this vision for the future is also grounded in a realistic assessment of the present. So for a quick example of this, in Hamilton, Ohio, they have a really great fellowship program that has injected the city government with supplemental capacity and fresh ideas. So it's an 11-month postgraduate program that prepares individuals for management level oriented career in city management, utilities, engineering, economic development, things like that. This competitive and nationally recognized program has attracted students from top graduate schools from within Ohio and has actually started to attract people from outside Ohio as well. Probably the greatest sign of success of the program is that many of the fellows after their program have gone to stay in the city or the county. So building that pipeline of talent, creating that bench of talent that has really helped with building civic capacity in the city of Hamilton. So moving on to strategy 3, about expanding opportunities for low-income workers. This third strategy is really based in the fact that efforts to revitalize small or legacy cities won't be successful if they only focus on higher income people alone. As we see it at GOPC, many smaller legacy cities have the opportunity to integrate inclusive policies into their revitalization efforts now while their markets are weak, to make sure they do not get stuck trying to maintain a diverse community once the market might come back and is working against them. So cities should be thinking about how to build that whole web of interventions for increasing opportunity, but focusing on closing that skills gap that we hear so much about in the news. An example of this is in Lima, Ohio. Lima, Ohio has a network of workforce development programs aimed at changing the culture around manufacturing jobs. So the program titled, or called Link Lima, is actually featured in the toolkit, but it aims to create a supply of local employer-ready talent. They hold events kind of called reverse job fairs, where the students showcase their skills to potential employers. One of my personal favorite success stories from this reverse job fair model called Makers Fest is from 2015, when 3 girls from Lima, 3 young girls still in high school, swept the welding competition. These young women each from a different school took first, second, and third place ahead of dozens of male competitors, kind of breaking the stigma about who a welder should be. And the employers have offered these girls well-paying jobs right after high school, and don't have the need to get a higher degree and provide opportunities to them in the community that they're already living in. So it's important to pay attention to matching skills with availabilities in the workforce, and in some cases removing barriers to those jobs. Moving on to strategy 4, it's about building on an authentic sense of place. So strong cities have a strong sense of place that encourages a diverse group of people to live, work, and play there. This fourth strategy is all about building on that and engaging in creative placemaking. If you are not aware, exactly what placemaking means. It's a term that is used to talk about, investing in creating places where people want to be. It's pretty much as simple as that. This could mean doing streetscaping, encouraging small businesses like coffee shops and bars to open downtown, or simply investing in public art. And so using placemaking as an economic development tool is kind of built on this graphic that you can see here on the slide. that many workers with choices, particularly higher earners and creative professionals, will first choose where they want to live and will then look for a job. So to compete for talented workers, cities need to invest in their unique sense of place. This is particularly important in downtowns, which need to be reestablished as the economic hubs of the region. So like you see in this graphic here, it starts, with place needs business, business needs talent, and talent wants place. And once you start building on that authentic sense of place, you get this virtuous cycle of sorts. Something, the Main Streets organization is obviously very aware of and active in. So building this strong sense of place needs to be rooted in authenticity. So cities should focus on how to best capitalize on their existing assets rather than trying to, recapture what is cool from another city or, trendy in another city. For smaller legacy cities in particular, creative placemaking can reframe what seems like a liability into an asset. So an example of this are the steel stacks in Bethlehem, Pennsylvania. It's a pretty authentic example of placemaking in a town with a deep history of steel manufacturing. With just some simple investments in lights, a stage, seating, and other park amenities, they're now able to host events here, concerts, parties, weddings, what have you, that actually bring people back to downtown Bethlehem. And is probably one of my favorite, I just think visually, cases of placemaking. So strategy 4 is a nice lead into strategy 5, which is based in the fact that strong, vibrant downtowns are a critical asset for the entire regional economy. Many small and mid-sized legacy cities have this great asset of a historic downtown. And because the fate of the central cities and their regions are so closely intertwined, downtown redevelopment should be a focus of regional revitalization efforts, not just local revitalization efforts. Like I said, Heritage Ohio's Main Streets model has a lot of success in smaller legacy cities and can often lead to a stronger downtown with active businesses and engaging events to get people on the streets. Again, placemaking activities such as facade improvements and streetscaping can go a long way to creating a stronger downtown. Moving on to strategy number 6, engaging in community and strategic planning. In these small communities where resources are scarce, competing visions for the future cannot all be implemented successfully. Smaller legacy cities are undergoing really significant transformations in their economies, their populations, and just their urban form. So community and strategic planning processes give communities an opportunity to have those tough but often very necessary conversations about what the future might hold. Cities are most likely to be successful when they blend this long-term strategic vision with an incremental process of change. That's kind of technical language, but essentially what it is that many small successful changes can lead to those large cultural shifts. It's about exercising that civic capacity muscle by checking off things on that long-term strategic plan and not trying to do everything at once and not having competing visions. Kind of harkens back to strategy number 2 about really focusing on that cross-sector shared vision. Moving on to the second to last strategy, strategy number 7, about stabilizing distressed neighborhoods. So cities must prevent declines and further declines really in their distressed neighborhoods. A lot of these cities have several neighborhoods that have extremely high vacancy or hyper vacancy and a lot of blighted properties. And in order to encourage reinvestment, they got to focus on rebuilding their local housing market. So city governments, community development corporations, and their partners, I think it's their duty to act methodically and use data to help make decisions about where exactly in these neighborhoods and which neighborhoods to deploy resources. In Ohio, county land banks operate in 52 counties and can be a great partner to help address vacant and blighted properties. These vacant and blighted properties have huge negative externalities on the surrounding neighborhood. And the land banks have a dedicated source of funding, and therefore it can often be a great partner in stabilizing distressed neighborhoods through demolition and sometimes through their rehab programs. Moving on to the final strategy, all these strategies are good, but strong cities thrive when state policy is responsive to their specific needs. So cities can't face all these challenges alone, the entrenched poverty, the weak housing markets, etc. Supportive state policy and federal policy is necessary to help smaller communities like this thrive. States like Ohio, where over 3/4 of the population lives in an urban area, need a meaningful slate of policies that help cities succeed. These policies range from support for active transportation, to infrastructure upgrades, to placemaking programs, to neighborhood stabilization through the land banks, etc. It's GOPC's position that Ohio should also consider how characteristics like population size or distress level impact how policy is implemented in different places. And what we mean by this is essentially that solutions that are one size fits all rarely get the right resources in the right places. So we made it through all of those 8 strategies that were outlined in that initial Lincoln report that we went over earlier. One of the things that we did for the toolkit was perform case studies of these strategies in action. So now that we've looked at the 8 strategies and what their technical definition is, I want to look at them in action. And the first one case study is on Lancaster, Pennsylvania. So Lancaster, it's a city of approximately 60,000 people in south central Pennsylvania. It's experienced many of the challenges common to smaller legacy cities in recent decades. The suburbanization of jobs, depopulation of the central city, and concentrated poverty. So I'll go kind of through a timeline of the revitalization efforts in Lancaster and also cover the different strategies that they used. So efforts to revitalize Lancaster really began in earnest in the late 1990s when a group of private sector leaders came together to create what was called the Lancaster Alliance. It was a nonprofit membership organization that then created a 15-year economic development plan. Nothing revolutionary, a pretty basic economic development plan. The plan focused on leveraging Lancaster's assets, which at the time included its historic downtown, and then it's also its location within Pennsylvania's Amish country. So they used these assets to position the city as a tourist destination and a regional entertainment hub. So within this 15-year economic plan, many of the goals of this initial vision were completed. And then in 2013, the Lancaster Alliance merged with an improvement district to form the Lancaster City Alliance and created a new 15-year economic development plan. What differs about this plan is this plan aims to sustain and build from the successes of the initial downtown economic development efforts, with a particular focus on increasing quality of life and empowering neighborhoods. So the Lancaster City Alliance now leads the implementation process for this plan and is coordinating 10 different core partners and more than 30 other affiliate organizations involved in different aspects of the plan. So when we talk about a shared vision and a strong civic infrastructure, you can really see this in action when they're getting everyone together at the same table, responsible for their own part of the revitalization. So stakeholders meet quarterly to report out on progress, set goals for the following quarter, and it's really helped create that network and web of connections and forge new partnerships. Moving to the next part, so in addition to the long-term work on building that strong civic infrastructure in Lancaster, local leaders have also worked to build on and showcase the city's unique sense of place. Much like the downtown redevelopment, there's another plan. The initial 15-year plan capitalized the Office of, the Public Arts Program also created a 15-year economic development plan that relied heavily on strategic planning process that had a very significant amount of public input. This kind of got a boost recently when in 2016 the New York Post boosted or named Lancaster the new Brooklyn for its art scene, food, and boutiques. Similarly, the Office of Public Works strategically incorporates quality of life improvements into public infrastructure projects. The thought process here is if we're already doing these capital improvements, let's make sure they're appealing, promote walkability, and include installations of public art. So Lancaster decided it could be a regional entertainment hub, and it built on that authentic sense of place, and it tried to be something that it wasn't, and it worked. Businesses came downtown, people visited for the art and food scene, and that virtuous cycle of placemaking was set in motion. But Lancaster's considerable success in revitalizing its downtown and drawing new residents had its own challenges, as always. Even as the population started to grow in Lancaster again and investment continued, and more young people, young professionals moved into the city, the share of Lancaster's residents living in poverty grew, and that issue of entrenched poverty persisted in Lancaster. So to address this issue, the mayor created a commission made up of nearly 50 organizations to address the issue. The commission consulted heavily with the public and those actually in poverty to see what the barriers were to overcoming their financial situation. After a strategic planning process, once again, the commission produced one good job, a strategic plan to cut poverty in half in Lancaster by 2032. So one initial positive result from this commission was the creation of a CDC called Equity Lancaster, whose sole purpose was to coordinate efforts to reduce poverty. This CDC provides a framework for all anti-poverty efforts in the city to work from. Another community development effort has focused particularly on a particular neighborhood that has not benefited from the same scale of private investment as downtown Lancaster. This neighborhood on the south side of Lancaster has particularly high concentrations of poverty. So what the Lancaster Housing Opportunity Partnership did, which it formerly was just traditionally offering low cost financing for low income home buyers, but it expanded its services to include community development and housing rehabilitation in 2012. So what you'll see going on here in Lancaster is they had that strong civic infrastructure set up, so when this new problem arose and persisted, they were able to tackle it successfully. So really two key takeaways from Lancaster that I'll leave you with is their focus on collaboration and strategic planning. There's, you'll probably hear in that last few slides are about 10 examples of strategic plans, but they actually had the capacity and the shared vision to carry out the strategic plans. They don't just let those plans sit on the shelf and gather dust. And then second, they embraced a culture of calculated risk-taking and collaboration that built up its civic infrastructure again and allowed it to respond to those future challenges. Like once they had that investment in downtown, they were able to then address the poverty that also plagued the city still. So moving on to the second city we looked at for a case study is South Bend, Indiana. South Bend is a city of 100,000 in northern Indiana and is no stranger definitely to the challenges that face smaller legacy cities. It was once the home of Studebaker, a car manufacturer. It had a reputation for quality and reliability, but with Studebaker, South Bend enjoyed many years of prosperity from its industrial base, and it reached a peak population of almost 132,000 people. But just the same as Lancaster, migration to suburban areas and the loss of the manufacturing base and the closing of Studebaker took a heavy toll on the city and led to huge amounts of disinvestment, especially in the central city. A little spoiler is, for the first time in a long time, South Bend population is actually growing again. And so we'll look at kind of some of the strategies that led them to reverse their trajectory. So like I noted, for many years, the city lived in the shadow of the Studebaker legacy. Slowly, however, some city leaders realized that this industrial past was exactly just that, the past. And the city had to find a new purpose if they were to succeed. When Studebaker did leave, all the way back in 1963, the physical remnants remained in the city, these large warehouses and these large factories. So beginning in 2000, the old Studebaker buildings were demolished to make room for a high-tech manufacturing and technology commercialization park as part of an aggressive brownfield remediation effort. So 2 technology parks were created in South Bend that actually utilized a state program. This state program allowed for localities to recapture a portion of state and local tax revenue, allowed that to be redirected to redevelop the park, very similar to a TIF, if anyone's ever worked with those. So luckily for South Bend's tech renaissance, the city was also situated along a high-speed fiber optic line. The city was not tapped into the fiber optic line. It had passed right by them, but with some city investment, they built the infrastructure, tapped into this, and built what is known as MetroNet, which had to be described to me. It is a high-speed fiber optic service that is available to businesses in South Bend and has really complemented that whole focus on the tech industry. And I'd be remiss if I didn't mention a big player in this. Much of this renaissance would not have been possible without South Bend's great asset of having a major research university, Notre Dame University. But collaboration actually between the city and the university wasn't always so great. Historically, the city and the university suffered from some town and gown tensions that led to very little collaboration. It took some new leadership at the university to realize that the success of the university and the fate of the city were very much intertwined. And since then, there has been increased collaboration, which has helped the city of South Bend significantly, especially with talent attraction and civic capacity building. So in addition to their focus on finding that new purpose, shedding that old history, South Bend is also home to several initiatives that focus on building civic capacity. The Bowman Creek Educational System is one of those. It's a collaboration between the city's educational institutions, including Notre Dame. It pilots community-engaged projects to address real-world challenges that are identified by actual residents in the neighborhood. So by strategically partnering with Notre Dame, the city of South Bend has turned what has began as a single engineering project for the school, and it's blossomed into a multidisciplinary cross-sector initiative in a low-income community that has brought together the city's other technical colleges and community colleges to help residents in this low-income community with the issues that they bring up. Attracting and retaining talent in South Bend after graduation is the goal of another program called N-Focus. So N-Focus is a nonprofit and it builds on the opportunities presented by South Bend's proximity to Notre Dame. The program recruits recent STEM graduates to work as consultants on challenges facing local government, businesses, and nonprofit organizations in South Bend. Its success can be measured in 2 ways: the $50 million that they've estimated of impact they've had, but what I think is potentially more important is that 70% of N-Focus fellows have stayed in Indiana, and many of those have stayed in South Bend, which has really created that pipeline of talent that's necessary to revitalize these small legacy cities and to build up that human capital in the city. So South Bend has also spent just as much time investing in their quality of place as they have their civic infrastructure. One of the most notable is Mayor Pete Buttigieg is his Smart Streets program. It's a project that completely overhauled a large section of roads going through downtown South Bend. Similar to many other small legacy cities, South Bend had two main one-way roads cutting right through the downtown of South Bend, which kind of acted as a highway moving through the downtown. And if you know anything about walkability and placemaking, having those two high-speed roads cut right through downtown did nothing good for the health of downtown. So part of that program, what they did was remove those one-way streets, make them two-way streets, slow the speed down a little bit, and added 2 or 3 roundabouts and bike lanes and streetscape enhancements. And it was probably one of the most controversial things that Mayor Pete has done, and it was extremely unpopular at first, but as a result, there's been huge amounts of investment in the downtown. People feel comfortable being in the downtown again, and there's restaurants and events, and so it's just a simple, act of incorporating placemaking into your infrastructure projects and getting rid of those one-way streets that aren't needed anymore can have a profound impact in creating that authentic sense of place. They kind of actually used a state program there too called Innovate Indiana, which emphasized place-based economic development. And so they received $42 million for their work in the central downtown. There's also been historic amounts of investment into a really cool department called Venues, Parks, and Arts. Kind of brings all the placemaking components of a city into one department. One project that they completed was the river lights in downtown South Bend. It's become a focal point for many holidays. That's just enhanced the asset that they had in their river. So finally, we have reached what the webinar is all about. We'll finally talk about the actual toolkit. So this toolkit was designed by Greater Ohio Policy Center and the Lincoln Institute of Land Policy, and is intended to help bridge the gap between these high-level strategies that we just went through to on-the-ground tactics. To do this, we're trying to compile resources that can help guide people on the ground in making change in their own communities. So first, we'll look at just how the toolkit is set up. So the toolkit has a page for each strategy that we just went through. Each strategy's page is then split into 3 different sections: tools, programs, and background information. So the tools on each strategy's page are guides for implementation. This includes things like how-to guides, checklists, etc. There are hands-on tools you can use to work on the relevant strategies. So, for example, the toolkit includes the Asset-Based Community Development Institute's ABCD toolkit, which in their toolkit, they provide talking points, meeting notes, mapping tools, etc. These are the kind of the things you can actually use, to work on these strategies. Second, we have some examples of programs or replicable initiatives that we illustrate with some examples. So, for example, if in these screenshots you're seeing the Michigan Economic Development Corporation, which is Michigan's equivalent to Jobs Ohio. You're seeing their program that they have. That's a grant program for placemaking that's partially funded through crowdfunding campaigns. So how it works is essentially if a project gets enough funding through crowdfunding, the state organization will match that funding for that project, get it funded, and get it built. So really interesting program, an example of placemaking, an example of how the state can have an actual placemaking program. So that's what that program tab will have, is different programs that we think are replicable in small legacy cities. They might need to be altered a little bit, but should be replicable depending on circumstances. And then lastly, we have the tab on background information. So this is really resources, including white papers and websites, which will further explain the strategy. This is just useful to learn more about the strategies and the specific programs that are listed in the toolkit. So while I encourage you to visit the toolkit online and just do some exploring, you may also be curious on where to start with the toolkit because there are 8 strategies. It can kind of be daunting. So the fact is, revitalizing and transforming smaller legacy cities is no simple and easy task. It's going to be one that will take years of persistence and a coordinated effort from leaders in all different sectors. But GOPC does have some recommendations on where cities should start. So our research on successful revitalization efforts has shown that many communities need to focus on the basics. Therefore, the first 2 baseline strategies are the best place to start in order to build that strong civic infrastructure that you can carry out other strategies. So that includes having that widely shared vision for what the future will look like. For this strategy, I recommend checking out the Intersector Toolkit, which is a tool featured in our Small Legacy City Toolkit. It provides some concrete resources on how to encourage collaboration among different sectors in your community. And then they also recommend, working to build and maintain that sufficient capacity to carry out the vision that you and your community comes up with. So what might be helpful here is checking out the program section for information about the place-based fellowships, like the one that we discussed in Hamilton, Ohio. So it's a way to engage students in your community and empower students and create that pipeline of talent. So that wraps up all the content I had to share with you today. So again, I encourage you to visit the toolkit at smallcitytoolkit.greaterohio.org. Also, the toolkit's a living and breathing thing. So if you have ideas of resources that should be included, please send me an email at my email at the bottom of this slide or fill out a form on the website. So I think there might be some time for questions if we have any.
All right, great. So you heard the man. If you have any questions, please do type them into the box this time. We'll give everybody a few minutes for that. I have just one quick question. You mentioned Michigan's Economic Development Corporation being similar to Jobs Ohio and that they have that match grant. Is there a similar program in Ohio? And if so, is it through Jobs Ohio or who would it be through?
So that's a good question. So Michigan's equivalent of Jobs Ohio has really taken on a place-based approach to economic redevelopment, which isn't exactly the same for Jobs Ohio, which is more focused on site selection and attraction of large employers. So unfortunately, I don't think there is a direct example of a similar program in Ohio, but that's personally one of my favorite programs. I think it's an example of getting community interest in something and then executing it with state assistance. Because like I said, you can do all you want in these cities, but they do have limited resources. But if you build up that civic infrastructure and can carry out these problems, the state money will not go to waste.
All right. Well, I completely agree. I think it's a great program. Well, it looks like we don't have any questions. You must have explained it really, really well. So with that, I would like to thank you, John, for coming and doing this webinar with us. Really good information for everybody out there. For our upcoming webinars and events, you can find them online at heritageohio.com. And thank you, everybody, for joining us today, and have a great one.
Thank you.